Everyone has a story. Stories have power. They help us understand each other. Rob, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Doug.
Let's go chat. This is Jessop's Journal. Rob, it's time to sign into Jessop's Journal.
All right, let's do it.
Hi, I'm Doug Jessop. Welcome to this episode of Jessop's Journal. With me today, Rob Shallenberger. Rob, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, and appreciate you having me here, Doug.
Not a problem. Now, I have to admit, a big part of the reason I came, to call you is my dad used to work with a guy that had the exact same name, and it was in the military, and then I come to find out you had been in the military, but apparently no relation. But
no relation yet. Flew F16s, T-38s, worked with the Air Force One for a little while, and you said, funny last name. That is true. So for the first few months, it was S+12. That was easier than Shallenberger.
So that little plane, the F-14. Okay, yeah. Now, you mentioned the Air Force One thing. You can't leave me hanging. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so that was awesome. I mean, incredible experience. You can apply to be an advanced agent for Air Force One, and I did that my last year and a half in the Air Force. And really, it's where you go with Air Force One anywhere in the world that it goes. You go out in advance, a week to 2 weeks in advance, and prep everything for Air Force One. So work with the crew. You want to make sure the president gets in and out. And the idea is to have no news stories, no stairs incidents, nothing like that.
Oh, come on, you're gonna keeping us out of business, jeez,
But this was cool. We went to Seoul, South Korea, Mexico, G20 summits. You just really see some amazing things. So another just cool experience and opportunity.
Yeah, well, aim high, right?
Well, yeah, there you go.
Okay. How in the world did you get into the military in the first place?
Well, do you want the long or the short version?
Yes.
The 3-minute version?
Yeah, we got time.
Since this is an interview and we're talking about life, and I know a lot of people, we all have different challenges, right? We're all going through something. And as a teenager, that was my time. I really had no direction. I had low self-esteem. It was a time in my life where I just didn't know what I was going to be doing, with life. It was tough. And I don't know if people can relate to that, but teenage years for me, that was my rough time in life. And I remember one day there's an event here in Utah called the Stadium of Fire, 4th of July celebration. And every year they start this 4th of July celebration off with this flyby of F-16s for anyone who's been there. And so my brother and I are sitting in the stands, and these jets come over, and if you've ever been around a fighter flyby, when they go over, you feel that rumble in your chest, and it's just an awesome feeling. Well, these jets flew by the Stadium of Fire, and we felt that rumble and that roar, and my brother and I looked at each other and said, someday we're going to fly those jets right over this stadium. And it was at that moment that, if you want to call it the seed of a vision, call it whatever you want, but it was planted. And something changed in my life. And whereas I wasn't even on track to graduate from high school at that point, everything changed. I mean, I got laser focused and asked, well, how do you become a fighter pilot? And that's really, everything changed. I got my private pilot's license at 17. I said, okay, I've got to go to college. I'm going to compete with some sharp cadets all over the nation, for these coveted pilot slots. And so really it was 16 sitting in the Stadium of Fire, watching the jets fly by, that was the seed that was planted, or the beginning of a vision, and it changed everything about my life. And ironically, 15 years later in 2007, both my brother and I had the chance to fly by the Stadium of Fire, him on the left side of the formation and me on the right side. We both became F-16 pilots. We did a broadcast from the cockpit.
Oh, yeah?
So Senator Orrin Hatch made the introduction. He was the senator at the time. He made the introduction. It was up on the big screen. My brother made a comment. I made a comment. I remember lining up. We flew over the stadium. Everyone's cheering in the stadium, and you don't hear any of that in the jet. You just hear. And after we'd gone by, the ground controller came over the radio and said, nice flyby, perfect timing. Congratulations, Shallenbergers. I remember chills up and down my arm and a tear in my eye. And it had really been 15 years to the day since we had sat in the stadium saying we're going to fly over the stadium someday. And we timed it so that, right when we fly over the stadium, it was perfect. So yeah, it was all lined up. Big Jumbotron cameras in the cockpit, family down in the stadium all crying.
Oh yeah, I can believe it.
So there you go. That's how it all happened.
So now, you actually were a pilot right after 9/11. How did that change for lack of a better term, the mission of the military, and specifically for the pilots?
Yeah, it changed a lot. I remember, just like a lot of people do, that exact day. I was in pilot training at the time in Oklahoma, and we were night flying. So, we're not getting back till 1 in the morning, and we're in that phase of training. I remember waking up at about 7:30 or 8 in the morning. because we'd gotten home late the night prior. And my wife came in the room and woke me up and said, Rob, you need to see this. I walked out, flipped on the TV right as Tower 1 was collapsing.
Oh, geez.
And I got on the phone, I called over, bases are getting locked down. I mean, I just got crazy stories from different friends who were in the F-16 at the time who were like, they were just told, get in the air. In fact, a friend of mine was in one of the two F-16s that was tracking down the flight that ended up going down in Pennsylvania. They were about 80 miles behind it, running it down. And they were literally on the radio discussing, you know, what happens if we catch it? We don't have any missiles. They just threw us right in the jet. We took off, and their plan literally was to, if they had to, ram the jet.
Wow.
Ram the airline. So they were going to try and hit the back or the wing, eject if they could, but possibly, you know, give up their life. So to answer your question, it really changed the game. Obviously, the tenor and tone of war changed. Before, you know, you talk about fighting governments. Well, now you're talking about fighting a decentralized group of people, Al-Qaeda. They don't have a home base. They don't have a country. Changed the whole dynamic. So our responsibility, I went to South Carolina after that, was called Noble Eagle. And for 3 years, we started flying air patrols over our own country.
Wow.
That had never happened before.
Yeah.
So, you know, you fly over New York, there's jets over the Super Bowl. Anytime the president would leave the White House, there's two F-16s or two F-15s or whatever with the president. So, you know, Bush at the time, when he'd go to visit his ranch in Texas, people don't know this, but there'd be two fighters over the top of him 24 hours a day. We had never done that before in the United States. So it really did change the face of everything. And of course, you know, now we're years later after that's happened, and warfare as we know it has changed.
When you're going to train as a pilot, what are the things that you prepare yourself for?
Good question. I'll give you the nutshell answer. So you spend a year in pilot training. Everybody starts out in what's called a T6, and then you go off to different branches. So you have a fighter track, you have a heavy track, which is refuelers, cargo, et cetera, helicopter track, and so on. You spend another 6 months in your track, so in our case, a fighter track. And then when you finish, you have a class of, say, 5 or 6. You come down and literally say, you know, we have two F-16s, one F-35, one F-15, number one student, what do you want? There you go. And then you get put into your specialty, if you will, your plane. So then I went on to another 10 months of what's called the FTU. You know, it's a fighter follow-on training where you really learn how to fly and employ your jet. So if you're in the F-15, you learn how to fly and employ the F-15. You learn the tactics and everything that go along with it. In the F-16, same thing. So in the F-16, you can do air-to-air or air-to-ground, meaning you deal with air-to-air threats or air-to-ground threats. And it can get very complex in either one of those scenarios. After you're done with that training, then you go to your operational base. So like I mentioned earlier, I went to South Carolina for my first operational assignment, and that's where you get very specific into what you're going to do. So for us, our primary role was called SEED, or DEED, Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses. So our role in the Block 50 F-16 was, if there's going to be something big that happens, we'd be one of the first ones in, take out the surface-to-air missile sites so that the people coming in after us, you know, aren't hit by them, and clear any air-to-air threats. If, let's say we go back a few years, you know that you're going to Afghanistan where there's no surface-to-air missiles, there's no air threat, you're going to go there for close air support. You would do a close air support spin-up, you know, several months prior to your deployment. So you would just focus just on close air support. And so you get really good at close air support. Yeah. But you've got to be ready to go within 48 hours anywhere in the world to do your primary job, your primary mission.
Somebody leaves from Hill Air Force Base. How long does it take to get from here to Kabul, Afghanistan?
Well, the main limitation there is the pilot.
Oh.
You know, you got to get sleep. So you can only spend so much time in the cockpit at one time without taking a break. So typically what you would do is fly half of that leg, sleep, get your rest, what they call crew rest, and then fly the second half of that leg.
Oh, okay.
And you have a tanker with you the whole time. So you take off with the tanker, and you just keep refueling off the tanker. So you could probably fly from here to somewhere in Europe first, spend the night in Europe, get your crew rest, and then finish the second leg the next day.
Okay.
You can be there fast.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying you're supersonic type stuff, but let's just say New York to London, about how long would it take?
You'd fly regular airspeeds just like an airline would.
Oh, okay.
Because you have the tanker. So you're flying along, it's a KC-135, it's a regular big airplane like as you.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I've seen, oh, those are big boys, yeah, I've seen them.
767, it's the same type size plane. So you're flying along with the tanker at the same airspeeds. same time frame.
You know, when you're in the military, and especially at your level, would it be fair to say that you were leading people?
Oh, you lead people, yeah, all the time. I mean, I was around some of the most amazing people in the world. In that environment, I loved the fighter pilot culture. You gave a fighter pilot something to do, it would get done well, and it would get done on time. It was just a great culture to be a part of. I mean, if someone handed off something to someone else, you didn't have to think about it again. It would get done. It was just an amazing environment to be in. So right out of the chutes, you know, you come out of pilot training, you're a young lieutenant, your job is to learn how to be a great wingman at that point. So you spend about 1.5 years as a wingman, and then you go through a flight lead upgrade, and then a 4-ship flight lead upgrade, and then an instructor upgrade. And the more upgrades you go through, obviously the more leadership opportunities you would have. And then the longer you stay in the military, of course, is you get promoted to flight commander, squadron commander, group commander. You're going to be leading larger and larger teams of people.
Mm-hmm. There's a phrase called lead with vision. So when you are a pilot and you're getting ready to go on a mission, what is that vision? What's that vision look like?
Well, I'll say it this way. So every mission, if you will, has a commander's intent behind it, which is what we sometimes substitute for the word vision. So there's a commander's intent of why you're doing this. Maybe it's to rescue a downed pilot. Maybe it's to, you know, neutralize all surface-to-air missiles. Whatever it is, there's a commander's intent behind it. And then every flight is going to have specific objectives that support that commander's intent. And so if you're flying as a big package of 70 different aircraft, there's going to be a commander's intent, and then every individual piece, if you will, of that package, that element, is going to have its individual objectives that support the commander's intent.
If you were to take the things you've learned in the military and convert it to the average Joe, I guess, how would you define leading with vision in a civilian role?
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question because that's exactly what's happened. So let me back up a little bit. When I left the Air Force, my father and I decided to start and join forces and start a company called Becoming Your Best Global Leadership. And he had already spent years researching high performance. So for example, we joined him, and what we would do is interview people. We'd look at people through history who have been great leaders and high performers. We define that as the top 10% in their industry. And what we were looking for is what sets apart great leaders and high performers from everyone else. Are there certain things they do and that people can do that would predict success? And one of those principles is to lead with a vision. We found that there are 12 principles of highly successful leaders that you see over and over in the very best. And so one of those principles is lead with a vision. Subsequently, we wrote another book called Start with a Vision.
Yeah.
And it's a planning process. There's 6 steps in it. Now, to really answer your question, it's so easy as humans. I think we all have been there. It's so easy as humans to default to the problem. You know, if you look at a relationship problem with a spouse or a son or daughter, it's so easy to get consumed by that. Oh, yeah, we used to get along, we used to love each other, now we don't, blah, 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 blah. Or if you look at sales, oh, we were doing great and then COVID hit and now the sales have gone down. And it's so easy by human nature to focus on the problem. But one of the things that great leaders can do, and I say great leaders, I think it's important, Doug, to define this. Leadership starts right here with every one of us, at least in my opinion. And we will either lead a life by design or we will live a life by default.
Oh.
And so leading a life by design starts right here. And it's not focusing on problems, it's focusing on what you said, which is the vision. And so instead of focusing on problems, whether we're leading our own lives, whether we're leading a family, or whether we're leading a team, it's about shifting the playing field to the vision rather than the problem.
So then what is Rob's vision?
Well, so can I whip out that book right there?
Yeah, sure. What the heck? Okay, shameless plug.
So the reason I bring this up is we're releasing a new book, and most people will probably watch this after it's released, called Do What Matters Most. And there are 3 habits that will help someone prioritize their time and do what matters most. Yeah, there's the shameless plug for the book.
Okay.
One of those habits is to develop a written personal vision.
Right.
Now, you asked me about my personal vision. A vision is something that's talked about all the time. If you say the word vision or goals, people have heard these terms. But for as much as they're being talked about, they're rarely being done. And in our research, we interviewed more than 1,260 different managers in 108 different global organizations, and only 2% of people had a written personal vision.
What's the difference between a personal vision and a mission statement?
Synonymous.
Okay.
So here's the thing about that, and I'll go back and answer your question about my personal vision. Vision and mission synonymous terms in my point. The whole
Okay.
point is, do we have something that's meaningful and giving us direction?
Gotcha.
The only reason why we focus on the word vision rather than mission statement is because in a fair number of companies that we've worked with, I'll just say this, how do you say this? That has almost been a word that's been overused.
Yeah.
Mission statement.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of burnout with it, and it's got a lot of negative connotation.
A lot of hyperbole.
A lot of hyperbole.
Yeah.
So by shifting to the vision and just using that word vision, that's what we're talking about. It's something
Okay.
that gives us clear direction, it's meaningful, but really it's a synonymous term.
Okay.
So back to your question, you asked what's my personal vision. In the book, in habit number 1, we don't just talk about a personal vision, but we invite people to look at their 5 to 7 most important roles in life.
Okay.
Personal would be a role if you're in a relationship with someone, husband or wife, parent, and so on. And so the vision is the starting point before goals or pre-week planning or anything else. It's just like a fighter pilot, right? Mm-hmm. Before you go out, we've got to know where we're going. And so we invite people to say, what's the very best version of you in that role? That becomes the vision. So I'll just take one example.
Okay.
My vision in the role of spouse, and I honestly think about this every day, it becomes an internal guide or compass. And it's this, that I am a kind and caring husband who always helps Tanya feel like a 10. I am totally faithful in thought and action, and I constantly strive to compliment her, serve her, and be the husband of her dreams. Now, I intuitively know whether I'm in alignment with that or out of alignment.
And she might help you,
Oh, yeah,
with that a
she
little
does.
bit. Say, a little, of course.
That's exactly right. And if I'm out of alignment, it's my responsibility to get back in alignment with that
Okay.
vision.
Right.
And so just by articulating it and writing it down, there becomes a huge power in that, and especially if we can do that for our 5 to 7 key roles.
Okay, and then there's another thing about managing. We manage ourselves, we manage our time, we manage people, etc. But a lot of the time, this is the way I look at it, is if you can be proactive instead of reactive, if you were to put it, managing with, for lack of a better term, a purpose.
Yeah.
So how does that apply with your background?
If you were to sit down with me for 1 minute and say, Rob, what's one habit that I could incorporate into my life that would change my life?
Okay.
Guaranteed, 100% of the time. It would be habit 3 from that book, Do What Matters Most, and it's really what answers your question. Because so many of us have different challenges, right? Like we alluded to earlier in the discussion, we have different relationship challenges, we're trying to figure out life, ourselves, health. Some people are going through cancer, whatever. How do we navigate all of this? And in the same research that we did, we found that 68% of people feel like prioritizing their time is their number 1 challenge. And I think we can all, especially during COVID, right?
Yeah.
And 80% of those same people did not have a process outside sticky notes and to-do lists, which you use the word proactive. Sticky notes, to-do lists are very reactive by nature. And so there's a process in there, it's habit number 3 that we call pre-week planning. And I've been doing this for about 23 years, and it is totally life-changing. And it's where we invite people to sit down somewhere between Friday afternoon and Sunday evening, because usually Monday morning, thick of the fire, right? It's already started. And there's really 4 simple steps. It's number 1 to review your vision and your annual goals. So just like a fighter pilot, we start with the vision. What's the commander's intent? Our lives are the same. What's our vision and annual goals? Step number 2 is to look at those same roles that you use for your vision. And step 3 is to ask yourself, what matters most in each role this week? And that shifts the playing field from what we have to do, quote unquote, to what we can do. So maybe it's writing a note to your son or daughter this week. Maybe it's a phone call to your dad. These are not things we have to do that we wouldn't typically do reactively, but we can proactively do. And then the 4th step is to assign a time to each action item. So review our vision, write our roles, what matters most in each role, and when will we do it. And simply doing that process of pre-week planning, will help us accomplish 800 to 1,000 additional things this year that we probably wouldn't have done otherwise, and with less stress. And so to answer your question, it's just a life-changing habit that helps us really take control of our time and lead that life by design, no matter what the challenges are that we're facing, because we all are.
Yeah, I've been doing that for a lot of years, and I call it planning in solitude.
Love it.
Little TMI, but it's like the shower. It's like, okay, I'm figuring out what's going on, everything. Because the one thing that is interesting, and I think COVID kind of illustrates this, just because you're busy doesn't mean you're productive.
100%.
Now, there's one thing that I look at. Rustico is the folks that make my journals. It's Jessop's Journal, and they made a journal for me, and it's got all these scars and marks and all kinds, because life comes with scars. You've done a whole bunch of different things. And so I'm dying to find out what in the world your answer is going to be to this. But the last question I ask everybody is, how do you want to leave your mark?
Yeah. I don't want to sound cliche on this, but if you know me, and we talked before this interview, and one thing I loved about you, Doug, is that you said I'm really transparent. I am who I am, and I'm the same way. And so I'll answer this in two ways. Number one, if someone leaves a conversation with me and has a desire to be a better person, that's my driver. My second driver, so in other words, if someone, and I don't want to sound cliche, but if someone feels like they want to be a better person as a result of pre-week planning or a conversation we had, awesome. It's leaving the world at least incrementally better. And the second is, I have a deep and passionate commitment to God. It's really a part of who I am in my nature. And so I felt the joy and the peace that comes into my life from that. And if I can help someone be some small part in their life to further their connection with God, then I feel like that's an important part of my and our purpose in being here. So I don't want to sound cliche, but I think that we are a part of a much bigger picture. And it's our responsibility to try and leave the world a better place. And so those are two things that if I go to my grave, would say, if I can do that, then this life will have been, worth it.
Oh, well said. Rob, thanks for coming on Jessop's Journal, and thank you again for your service to our country.
You're welcome. Thank you, Doug.
There's a couple other people we want to thank. JW Custom Hats makes my hats, Taylor Cooperative with the clothes. It is Rustico, with the journals, so thank you guys. Here's another thing you may not have thought of. Okay, you wash your hands. Have you thought about washing your nose? Not kidding. Clear nasal spray, great stuff. And of course, we have the folks who have Five Wives, those adult beverages. Here's the thing I want people to remember. Everyone has a story. Stories have power. They help us understand each other. With another entry into Jessop's Journal and Rob Shallenberger, I'm Doug Jessop, ABC4 News.